Hi guys, welcome to my channel once again. On this episode I want to talk about something very interesting and very important, and it's titled How Grief Affects Our Brain, or your brain. Either way, how grief affects the brain. Now, in the aftermath of your loss, you may begin to wonder how or about your grief symptoms. You begin to get concerned about your grief symptoms. Have you found yourself different than you imagined? Have you found yourself dull or numb, or you realize that there seems to be a fog in your brain, a sense of disbelief and longing that is somehow painful or thereabout, even though it's expected? Have you on some level expected some sorrow and anxious thoughts? Well, the interesting thing about grief is that it's an extremely emotional experience. Grief is an extremely emotional experience. Now, when you begin the process of mourning, most of your mental attention is directed towards it. The moment you begin to mourn after the loss of a loved one, every form of your mental attention is directed towards that mourning. Now, the scientific basis that you're experiencing, now research shows that mental tasks are deeply affected in many people in the early stages of grief. I'll take that again. A research shows that mental tasks are greatly affected, in the early stages of grief for many people. Now, grief may impact you or your loved ones in various ways. Concentration is compromised, completing projects seems impossible, memory and recall are less sharp, ability to make simple decisions is reduced, organization and planning are usually challenging, a great state of absent-mindedness might even set in. People can become so absent-minded when they are grieving. People can become so find it difficult to even make decisions. Decision making may reduce, or ability to even make such decisions. Find it difficult to complete projects that normally they would have done in a space of short time. Alright, but what exactly is happening? It is your brain. Your brain is trying to recover. Now, you're experiencing a deep biological response to your loss, just as you're experiencing physical, psychological, and emotional responses. When there is a loss and you're trying to recover, there is going to be psychological and emotional responses, physical responses, but at this point it's because your brain is trying to recover as well. Now, the hormones and chemicals are released and internal reactions are disrupted, so your important body system shifts into emergency mode, and all this starts in the brain. The brain is a very interesting part, an important part of our body system, and because of the way the brain functions, it has a way of regulating itself. So once there is a change in that mental state, the brain, in a bid to recover, shifts into an emergency mode and disrupts the regular processes of the brain. Now, there are different parts of the brain that plays roles in grief symptoms. So number one is the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, this section of your autonomic nervous system is in the brainstem and lower part of your spinal cord. Of course, as sense of biology, you would have found that interesting. Now, in this system, which of course is what handles rest. Now, so the parasympathetic nervous system is what actually handles rest in man. Now, you may find that your breathing, your digestion, and rest, which this particular part of the nervous system controls, alright, your breath may become slow or shallow. Your appetite may reduce, okay. You may have insomnia, you find it difficult to sleep, and there might be disturbance. So, come with me now. I said the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for rest, for sleep, for digestion, for breathing, which of course is a part of the autonomic nervous system in the brainstem down to your spinal cord. Alright, the lower part of the spinal cord actually. So, once this happens, you may find that you're finding it difficult to eat, no appetite. You find it difficult to sleep, insomnia. You feel disturbed and restless, okay? And then your breath may become shallow and short. Now, the next part of the brain that plays a role in grief is the prefrontal cortex, or what we call the frontal lobe. Now, this area actually performs a function of meaning, planning, self-control, and self-expression. Now, scientific brain scans shows that loss, grief, and traumas can significantly impact your emotion and physical processes. Isn't that interesting? So the frontal lobe, once there is trauma or loss or grief, it impacts emotional and physical processes. So if normally we are able to plan properly, you're able to give meaning to things, you're able to have self-control, once that happens, you will not be able to do that anymore, because the frontal lobe now begins to find it difficult or exhausting to actually perform those functions. Now, the limbic system. Now, the limbic system is a part of the brain that controls our emotions. All right, it's particularly the hippocampus region that actually performs the function of emotions. Is the one that interprets emotions and whatnot. Now, you would imagine that because it's participates in emotions, it is in charge of personal recall, emotion, memory, integration, attention, ability for you to take interest in others. It is that part of your brain that makes you fall in love with someone. It's that part of your brain that makes you recall what someone did to you or events that happened. It's that part of your brain that gives you memory integration. Now, perceiving loss and grief as a threat. Okay. Now, before that, let me say that during grief, it creates a sensory oriented and protective response to loss. Yeah. So once the brain or the frontal, the limbic system rather, understands that there is loss, it creates a protective or sensory response to your loss. Now, because it will now perceive loss and grief as a threat, the amygdala portion of this system instructs your body to resist grief. Sometime ago I talked about amygdala hijack, where I said the amygdala hijack is a system where the amygdala hijacks the regular brain process. All right, yeah. So at this point, the amygdala tells the brain to resist the grief. So you may experience some instinctual or physical responses to triggers that remind you of your loss. So you remember I said that once the limbic system, which is responsible for a number of emotions and other things, creates a sensory chemical, right? A sensory oriented protection or protective covering to your loss once grief sets in. Now, the amygdala now creates a form of, I'm trying to look for the word to use now, create a form of message telling the brain to resist grief. So because of that, you may find yourself giving some physical responses to triggers that remind you of grief. Now, isn't that interesting? Now, your psychological grief response pulls so much from the regions of your brain. Your psychological grief response rather pulls so much from regions of your brain. And I said the areas that manage attention and memory are activated. The sections that focus on emotion and relationships are stimulated, and the zones that are dedicated to planning and language are triggered. Hormones reserved for emergencies course through you. Now, your hormones are reserved for emergencies. They are reserved because they want to. So when the brain is performing its own function of either creating resistance or calming you down, making it impossible for you to complete task and all that, hormones for emergencies are reserved. Sometimes so much happens at once that the brain resources are overwhelmed and you begin to draw a blank or even daydream and even long painfully for your loved one when the memory or the brain resources are overworked, and every day the business or your people at work will suffer. Grief is in front and center of your head as well as your heart. So at that point where the brain is overwhelmed or overworked out because you're grieving or because of your loss, everything ceases. Nothing interests you anymore. So grief occupies the front, the center, and of your head and even your heart. So it is important that you give yourself a break as you mourn. It is important that you take this break so that your brain can recover, and be patient with your loss and grief symptoms as well. Seek support from your loved one at every point of your journey. Get a support group or even speak with your therapist. Grief is a process of your mind and body. Grief is a process for your mind and body. So be kind to yourself. You cannot be harsh on yourself. You have to be kind to yourself. Each point and every stage of your grieving moment, your brain is trying to adjust. So do not overload your brain. All right. So till I come your way again next time, remember we have talked about how grief affects your brain. If this is your first time on this channel, please do subscribe, share this video to as many who need to hear it. Till I come your way again, it's bye bye.